All right, here we go. Day 3, Angular Remote Conf 2015. Our first talk is by Sani, and hang on, I don't have my notes up. All right, here we go. Day 3, Angular Remote Conf. And now it is playing back to me. I don't know if it's playing back to me through you or through...
Yeah, it's through me. I've just had to pause it. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to people in my time zone, GMT.
Let me do a quick intro and then you can take it away. Sani here runs a startup called Hybrid that uses cross-platform mobile development techniques to create innovative solutions, and Sani co-manages the Ionic UK community in the UK and has done stints with companies like Microsoft, Huddlebuy, and Onritsu in the past. So I'll go ahead and let him take it away. It's all you, Sani.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Charles. Okay, once again, good day to everybody. Hope everybody's having a lovely day. Yeah, so today, well, as you know, my talk is going to be about Ionic, and some of you might have heard of Ionic, some of you might not have, but in essence, Ionic is a great framework that we use to build hybrid mobile apps with Angular. So I'm just going to talk about that briefly. Just before we start, I want to share a link with everybody to ensure that everyone kind of has the link to the slides, if that's okay. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and do a screen share right here. Hello, Charles. Can you confirm with me if that screen share is on now?
Yeah, it is screen sharing.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, so I'll start by showing, maybe spending a couple of 20 seconds. If everyone can go to my GitHub, and for this link, that's the link to the slides. So it's saniyusuf.github.io/ionic/present. So, okay. I'm guessing I will just switch over now to the slides. Okay, so the title of the talk today is Building Mobile Apps with Ionic and Angular. And firstly, like I said, I'll do a brief intro of myself again. I run a small startup called Hybrid, where we kind of make a lot of innovative mobile solutions with mostly cross-platform, especially with Ionic. We have love for Ionic, and we really think it's something really great. I also co-organize Ionic UK, and I do some mobile writing and training. And I'm an absolutely big fan of Avatar, the movie. So yeah, if you're a big fan, we'll get along. All right. So the talk is structured in such a way. We have the overview. We're just going to start off with a brief history lesson, of the early days of why we have Ionic today. We're also going to introduce Ionic, have a small overview of the UI components and some of the other components that it comes with. Have a look at the CLI. It's never fun if you don't have any demos, so I'll show you a little bit of magic with Ionic, and then we'll round up with some good words to go ahead. Let me just make this full screen. Right here. Okay, so just to begin. So today in the world of mobile applications, everybody wants to develop a mobile application, and considering we know that the two big boys of like the mobile OS platforms are the Android and iOS. Windows Phone is it's slowly catching up, but it's probably not as big as Android and iOS. And if you want to create a successful mobile product, you want to be available on Android and iOS automatically. Gone are the days where you launch on one platform and kind of launch on the other platform later. So the normal way you go about this is you create a native app, which is basically you'd use the tools provided by the OS vendors. So for Android, you use the Android SDK and Java code. For iOS, you use the iOS SDK with maybe Objective-C or Swift, which is new. And that's traditionally how you would go about things if you wanted to get a native application or a mobile application in essence. So native is great, but it does have some downsides. So I think the first thing with native is, you need to be proficient in every platform. And the thing is, with native, it's firstly, it's kind of hard to find really skilled developers that are really good to create your mobile app for you. And also they would need to be very, very like skilled. And also another major problem is you have entirely separate code bases. So for example, you have a team of 4 using Java and developing your Android application. And you also have another team of 4 using iOS, the SDK, to create your iOS application. And these 2 teams cannot interact, so they can't share like code or resources, and that can be a pain. So if a boss hits one guy from this team, you can't have the other guy to replace him, and vice versa. And also, native is surprisingly very, very expensive, and it takes a lot of time. This is why sometimes you see a lot of mobile applications. The iOS version is either ahead than the Android version, or vice versa. You have the Android version maybe with new features, and the iOS version just hasn't gotten there yet. That's just because it takes a lot of time, with development and debugging and things like that. And it's absolutely expensive. I mean, and a lot of these native developers don't even want to work full-time for you. They're mostly contractors, are really expensive to hire and have them do your work for you. So, and this is another bad thing with native is like, it just keeps on like linearly growing. So if you want to support more platforms like Windows now, you have to hire another team of absolutely separate individuals to kind of do your Windows work for you. And BlackBerry, I'm not sure, a lot of people still use Blackberries, but if you needed a BlackBerry application, you'd have to do the same thing. And as day goes by, we have all these other platforms coming out, like Ubuntu OS, Firefox OS. For some reason, if you need to support those, you need to hire a separate team. And like I said, from the previous slide, these teams don't share resources or anything. But then this is a big question that I normally ask people. I said, it's 2015. Do we really need to? Why are we still coding for multiple platforms? Before the era of mobile, we had the web, and all you needed to do was create just one web application. You didn't need to have 5 teams. You just needed to maybe, Internet Explorer obviously has its issues. You need to just do a little bit of optimization for IE6, IE7, IE8, or things like that. Maybe some few bugs with Safari or Chrome. But apart from that, you generally use the same code base to just serve up to the internet, to the web, and everybody has access depending on independent of device that they use. As long as they have a web browser, they can access your application. So, this had a lot of people earlier when mobile applications, native mobile development kicked off, say around 2010, really. A lot of people are looking for an alternative. That was a major question they asked. So, then this great project by a couple of lovely guys in Canada created Cordova. Used to be called Nitobe, but it became Cordova. The Apache Cordova team kind of created this open source library or technology, as you can call it. Basically, there's a lot of misconceptions about what Cordova really is. People ask so many questions. What is it? How? In plain sense, Cordova is simply just a technology that lets web applications access native layers of mobile applications. So if you have a mobile app, the only difference between a mobile app and a web app generally is that with the native mobile application, you have access to the device runtime, things like the GPS, things like the Bluetooth, things like the camera. With a web application, you don't. So Cordova's kind of is just a technology, very innocent and great technology that just sits right there and mediates communication and lets you kind of get access to this native API runtimes. And also, but apart from that, also Cordova lets you create one single code base, which is really great. And then you can kind of serve that code base for different platforms. And it's built with the web in mind, so it's just plain old JavaScript and stuff. So you have all the tools that you need with your normal, you're used to with normal kind of web development tools or your IDEs and stuff. You can use Chrome to test. So pretty much Cordova just came about that and made this kind of write once, run everywhere dream come alive. And that's it, when that happened, a lot of people were actually pushing for HTML5 to be a standard for application development. Apple stopped supporting Flash at that time, similar around 2011. I think one of our greatest pros were Facebook. Facebook actually came along and entirely rewrote all their mobile applications with kind of a fork of the Cordova platform, I think. And it was a really great time because we saw all these big companies trying to push the web standards, and that was great. But I think a year later, this was also Facebook gave us one of the shocking news, which is they dropped HTML5. Mark Zuckerberg, you can see on TechCrunch, kind of saying that was the biggest mistake they made. A lot of people didn't like the apps because they complained that it had performance issues and stuff, which was true, actually. I remember using my Facebook application at that time, and I really complained that it's much slower now. It's not as slick as it used to be and stuff like that. But then there's a question, are you building the Facebook app? Facebook is a multi-million, probably a multi-billion-dollar company. They have a massive budget. They have a large team of experienced native developers. They can afford it. They have it all. Their revenue depends on these applications. So maybe it wasn't the right thing to do for them at that time to kind of put all their eggs in one basket and try to just go to the web. But that's the question. Are you building a Facebook app? Most people aren't. It's not just simple like that. Most people aren't really going for that level. If you are building a Facebook app, absolutely, you should totally use, maybe try Go Native or another approach. And then this right here is the number one thing I tend to hear a lot of people say, which is I hear that hybrid apps are slow. It's the first thing you hear, especially from native developers. And well, my answer is that most people that say say this have never actually developed hybrid apps before. So a lot of people that go around saying hybrid apps are slow, apps with a Cordova or phone gap are really slow. They probably just heard it from someone who's heard it from someone who's heard it from another person who's actually never developed a mobile application. But there is some truth, to it, because a lot of hybrid apps are, in the words of one of my mentors, he calls them Franken apps. So a lot of people have a web application and they just take this entire web application. They want it to be available everywhere, and they just kind of dump it in, build it up with Cordova, and they think everything's going to be okay. But absolutely not. It's not as simple as that. It's not as straightforward as that, rather. And I always tell people as well, if anything you're building is slow, regardless if you're going native or hybrid or pure web approach, if any application you're building is slow, you've either chosen. Do not blame the technology. A lot of developers are quick to say, you know what, Cordova is bad, PHP is bad, JavaScript is bad, Java is bad. No, not necessarily. You've either chosen the wrong approach to build out your application, or you're absolutely doing something wrong. You're not optimizing correctly. No application that you're building should be slow because of the technology you're building with it. In essence, if that makes sense. So we'll move on from there. Also, one thing that quickly goes unnoticed is how much mobile devices have rapidly improved in the past couple of years. So we had the original iPhone in 2007, which had 620 megahertz of processing power, just around 1 to 8 gig of RAM. Fast forward to 2010, just 3 years later, we had doubled that in terms of processing power and RAM. And fast forward to 2015, we have around 4 times more RAM and similar. Android devices actually tend to even go a bit further. Some of them have 4 gigabytes of RAM, quad-core processors and 64-bit architectures already. So what I'm trying to say is that mobile devices have rapidly improved. You have more processing power on your mobile phone than on your average PC in just around the early millennium. I think the iPhone 4 is probably has, I think, 4 times more power than my first computer, which was around 2010, my first personal computer. So, you know, it's just Moore's law. You know, as time goes on, we have better and faster processors, and we have advancements like that. And also today, another thing you need to understand is with the web is if you look at the caniuse.com, which is a really great website for you to see if you can use like the latest and greatest things of browser from W3C. Basically, you'd see that web standards have rapidly improved, and also Android, which used to be based on just the Android kind of browser, they just left it to the implementation of the the device vendors. Now it's actually absolutely Chromium based. So Android default browser is Chrome, which is Chromium based, obviously. And they've even gotten a step further in Android, I think from KitKat, which has separated the engine from the core of Android, so you can get updates of your Chrome browser independently of the platform, which is really great. So you always have like the latest. And also iOS users tend to keep their devices up to date. And we'll get to the point I'm trying to make here in a very short while. So I had a dabble on Mixpanel while making this presentation, and iOS 9 was launched around I think a week ago. And you can see that it's already overtaken, the rate of adoption has gotten to almost 50%. So you seem to have more iOS 9 devices already in a couple of days. And you can see the downward spiral of iOS 8 already. And this is very similar with Android. You know, it's a bit slower because Android is much more of a complicated ecosystem. But you can see that Lollipop, which is around the latest, Marshmallow has been announced, but I think most phones, Lollipop is still the latest thing you can get. You can see how it's kind of almost the dominant platform OS now for Android. So most phones out there seem to be upgrading to Lollipop or have Lollipop. So it's certainly a great time. And one point like I'm trying to make with all this is that if you're creating a native application, the reason why native applications tend to be have a lot of goodies with them is because the OS vendors have already created some of these great toolkits. You know, the UI toolkit, the Android material design language stuff. You know, they've given you these great buttons, labels, swipe menus, tabs. They have things like common UI language where you don't have to worry about how it looks on a tablet or you just need to do a minor optimization. The views are already created for you. You just need to implement them. Just the interfaces are there. Your navigation and your stack history is handled for you. You know, things like transitions are easy to implement. And gestures, you know, 2-finger swipe, 4-finger swipe gestures, touch gestures, all these things are there. But then if you want to create a hybrid app without any framework, it's actually a bit more painful, because with the web, you know, we're just used to the web is built for, you know, the mouse and click traditionally. I know it's getting better now, you know, with like native implementations of touch stuff, but it's still at a shaky place. So what I'm trying to say is that if you wanted to use, you know, the web standards to build a mobile application, you're left to do all these things yourself. You know, simple things like the 300 millisecond delay. It's not, you have to handle that yourself. If you wanted to create something as simple as a mobile button, a button that looks like a mobile button, it's actually not as straightforward. You need to write some CSS. There isn't really any standard. So, you know, you have so many people trying to make the same thing and everyone's just having their own implementation. So it's sort of like, you know, browser vendor wars all over again. Everyone's trying to do the same thing, but going different ways about it, you know. So we needed to bridge the gap between web and native, you know. we needed these rich native styled UI components and interactions, but built with web technologies. So I'm talking about, you know, animations, very fast performing animations with web technologies. We needed UI APIs. And when I say UI APIs, I'm not just talking about jQuery widgets. I'm talking about real rich user interface APIs like the tabs, mobile tabs, you know, the slide menus and things like that. And this is where Ionic comes in. So a lot of people, although Ionic's been around for a while, a lot of people still find it a bit difficult to kind of see where Ionic actually fits in the stack. And I'm going to explain this in a bit more detail. But Ionic is everything I've just discussed so far, these problems with native SDK and trying to make that same experience for web applications or hybrid apps. This is what Ionic tries to bring to the table. So Ionic is some people call it the Ionic framework, but I think more recently we mostly say the Ionic SDK. So think of it as the SDK for creating hybrid mobile applications with web technologies. Simple as. So Ionic is built with, you know, web technologies that you already know, HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript. And so you're going to feel right at home already using this set of tools with you. And also, this is a trend actually of sort of like the popularity of AngularJS. So AngularJS is actually the one in blue. Apologies for missing kind of text or something like that. But you can see that from 2012 to 2015, AngularJS is kind of been on the upward spiral. So it's kind of the most dominant framework, JavaScript framework out there. And this is a comparison with like frameworks like Ember, React, and Backbone and Knockout. So you can see how it's on kind of an upward spiral. So the guys at Ionic saw this and they said it will make sense, you know, to use Angular, something that a lot of developers have and a lot of love and know how to use, to kind of bake into Ionic. And so this is what they did actually. Ionic is just it's a framework. It's actually it's built with Angular, deeply integrated with Angular. Angular is a framework that's already been proven for large-scale web application development. A lot of big names like Virgin and stuff are using it for this web apps. It kind of teaches HTML new tricks, you know, UI components. We can create UI components using directives and services and stuff like that. And also another great feature of Ionic, it's actually native focused. So it's modeled on the native SDKs. You know, so the guys that building Ionic actually had a look at all these native SDKs from iOS and Android and looked how, you know, they looked, how they interacted, the experience, and kind of modeled that with web technologies. Because the last thing we want in a mobile app is the user doesn't really care what the mobile app is built with. They just expect specific interaction level, and as long as that is satisfied and it's performant, it's great. Users don't really kind of download applications and go, oh my god, it's a native app, I don't want to download it. It's not all vegan and meat eaters like that. It's much more straightforward, built on top of Cordova, you know. So another really great feature with Ionic, it's performance obsessed. So there's a lot of performance optimization, you know, hardware accelerated animations that don't stutter, minimal DOM manipulation. You hardly need to touch the DOM, which is probably one of the most expensive operations on the web. 300 millisecond tap delays, you don't need to worry about that. That's all handled for you. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is native developers don't necessarily have to worry about these things. So why should web developers have to worry about these things when they're creating mobile apps? We just want to create great apps, not kind of spend our time endlessly optimizing. And this is what Ionic promises. And also, you know, it has a great CSS library, which is built with just plain old CSS, but it's also very SASable, I say. You know, it's built with Sass. So if you're used to like Sass or less, you are kind of at home already. You can have really kind of advanced CSS pre-processing. They have a great Ionicons library, which contains a lot of icons, and that's open source as well for you to use. So if you need icons on your apps, you don't need to go around just kind of baking in font awesome or jQuery stuff. It's already there built in for you. And how does it all come together? So this is how it actually comes all together. You have your app on the top of the stack, the code for your app, which then interacts with the code, the Ionic boilerplate code or the bundle code. And that is obviously done with AngularJS. And then you have the Cordova web view or the Cordova stack, which is what mediates communication between the native SDKs and your app. And another point I want to make with Ionic, it's very, very, very kind of componentized or decoupled. So for example, you have an already existing hybrid app that maybe you've built with something like React or Knockout, and you don't want to maybe use Angular. You still use the Ionic CSS library, the Ionicons on their own within your application. And so it's very decoupled. So you can actually use a few things and here and there, how to what extent you want to use. So it's always good to talk about stats, because that's what people want to see when they choose a new technology. They want to see who's using it, how good is it. So as of around yesterday, we have around 19,500 plus stars on GitHub. Ionic does. It's very, very popular, top 50. More than 1 million apps have been started from the Ionic CLI. The current version is around 1.10, current stable version in 2015. And also, so at this point, we're going to have a brief overview of the UI components to see what Ionic actually has. So you have just, simple list, and over on the right side, you can see the HTML implementation of these things you see on the left. So these are just, normal CSS and basically HTML stuff. And these classes actually come with Ionic to help you do stuff. But that might be simple, so we might take it a bit step further. We actually have a complex list. And if you're following up with the presentation, you can, by that link over there, you can actually interact with some of these things. So for example, complex list, you can just swipe to the left to have other stuff. And you can reorder, and you can actually delete items that you don't want. So these are stuff that are already done for you and provided, and you can see that they're very expressive, all the Ionic elements kind of are prefixed with this Ion prefix here. So Ion list and Ion item, very, very expressive, makes you understand what's going on. Simple Angular and ng repeat and stuff like that. Then we also have a great feature, which is collection repeat, which is actually one of my favorite features. It's sort of an advanced feature, but I'll explain a bit. So one problem that a lot of Angular apps or generally web apps suffer is with the problem of scrolling. When you have a long list of elements, say 1,000 items, you tend to, especially on a mobile phone, because you have limited memory and processing power, you tend to experience a slowdown in smoothness. So with collection repeat, that goes away, especially with the Angular ng repeat, where you have a lot of watches. But with collection repeat, that actually goes away, because what happens is it's a really great tool. It just only renders the visible parts of that list. So as you keep scrolling, no matter, you have 3,000 beautiful cats here, but all of them, the scrolling performance never really kind of slows down, because only what we can see on the screen is rendered, and that's really great. And I think this is one of my favorite features of Ionic. You also have navigation handled for you. You can go to page 1, page 2, page 3, all that navigation stack handled. And you can see how you can add navigation buttons, very expressive as well. One great thing is it works with the Angular back button. Even when you're creating native applications, that Angular back button is kind of a pain to handle at times. So it's really great to see that that works. And also you can see animations and transitions that's already built into you. And these transitions are iOS specific and Android specific and so on. And then you have things like tabs, scientific facts. You can just go to each tab and you can come back to these tabs and you don't lose your state. So we went in here, we went here, and we came back, and you can see that we still like maintain our state. And so that's really good. And you can see the code for this. It's really, really expressive. So Ion tabs, and each tab here is just a child of that. And another thing is the side menu, which is really great. I think this is another feature I really, really like. You can have an easy side menu. You can see the very, very expressive code and straightforward. So we also have like the slide box, where you can just put items and slide with like a little navigation showing up. And I understand some of a lot of people watching this might be saying, well, these are really simple stuff and everything. Absolutely, but the thing is, for you to implement this on your own with like pure HTML and have it work properly on a mobile phone and look and act as a native counterpart does, is slightly sort of a challenge. But even when it's easy, you know, we want to have a specific standard way of doing things so that we don't have multiple implementations of different stuff. And I think this is where Ionic really shines. You know, it gives you one interface where you can do all these things. And we'll rush through some of these features like the action sheet, which is just available to you as an Angular service, an Ionic service built on Angular, where you can just inject into your controllers or your other services and then use. And a lot of these things are really, really like decomponentized. They return promises, so you can handle them great. You have things like the popover as well, which is really great. And you have like a modal window as well. Absolutely great. And one thing I like with the modal window as well is when you are on a bigger screen, it just acts and behaves normally. And you can really, really like customize it the way you want to, give it an isolate scope if you want to, or so many things basically with the documentation of Ionic, all that is listed. So another great feature is the pull to refresh feature. You can just pull to refresh here and like see new elements being added, and you can see how expressive the code is. It's just something you add at the end of a list. Tell it on refresh, I want you to fire this function. What text should I show? What icon should I show? Which is really, really great. Even when you're pulling what text do we show, you can see pull to refresh, which is specified right here. And also, Ionic has a great ecosystem around it. So there's a lot of people, maybe designers, that don't really like to. One problem that people complain, I think this is a general problem in the web, is like a drag and drop interface, because a lot of, you know, like the native side of things, when you're creating a native app, you kind of have like a little drag and drop interface where you can just put in components. I think this is where the Ionic Creator comes in. You can just create stuff, drag and drop, show it up to your client, and if they like it, you don't have to start from the beginning. You can just download that code and work on it. So it's really great for digital agencies and stuff and designers. You also have the Ionic View app, which lets you kind of preview your app without actually having iOS SDK or Android SDK installed. So if you're creating an app for a client, you can just give them a unique code and they can view that app on their phone without having to install anything. They just need to install the Ionic View app, enter like the unique ID, and they can view it. So it's a great way for teams working to kind of keep in contact with what's going on. You also have NG Cordova, which is like Angularized service based for the Cordova plugins, so that they work well with Angular and like the digest cycle and everything. You also have the Ionic IO ecosystem, which is a bunch of sweet like tools like for analytics, push notifications. Because one problem a small problem with hybrid applications is sometimes when you look for like tools, they only support like the native counterpart. So Ionic IO changes that, you know, providing you most of these great tools and easily baked into the Ionic framework. A new one that came out is Ionic Market. So if you can just build like think of it as like a theme. So it's like themeforest.net or something like that, or template monster. You can create great Ionic designs or themes and decide whether you want to charge for it or give it for free or plugins. So great stuff. So for example, if you want to create an app, maybe a music application, you don't know anything about design, or you can just go and buy off this template and just model it up from there, and you're good to go. Another really one I like is Ionic Playground, which I actually call the plunker or the code pen for Ionic. You can just go on there, play.ionic.io, and just start getting around. I would actually suggest that when the demo time is here, some of you can just go on here and just write some code and just follow up. And also, the Ionic SDK comes with a very, very great CLI tool. So if you're following this as well, you aim to follow the demo, you can just go ahead and do and install Ionic with Node right now with this command. So it's really great. It comes pre-configured with Gulp as a build tool, SAS, Bower, live reload, and everything. Lets you run stuff. A really new one is the Ionic Labs. Now this is sort of like a user interface for the Ionic CLI. So if you're like me a couple of years ago, where you hated the command line, you didn't like to use the command line, but you want to create a great Ionic app, you could just download the Ionic Labs. It's available for Windows, OS X, and on Linux as well. Absolutely, 3 major platforms. So you can just go there, create a new app, serve it, see how it looks, all without knowing how to use the command line, and even build and package your app. And I see this being a very important tool as they add new features. So like I said, in 4 commands, you can literally start testing your app. You can just go ahead and npm install Ionic and Cordova. For the demos, you do not need Cordova. So I'll give you a minute now. You can just go and do an npm install -g Ionic, and you can follow. As soon as you have Ionic installed, you can follow up with me. So at this point, we are going to kind of have a quick demo. We're not really going to learn, I'm not really going to teach how to kind of do stuff in depth. I'm just going to show you some of the great things, like the starter templates that come with Ionic. I'm going to show you something I call platform continuity. So a lot of times when you build, and I'll explain that, a lot of times when you're building a hybrid app, you're worried about how it would look on Android, on iOS, because Android has separate ways it makes stuff look, and iOS the same. So with Ionic, they have this thing they call platform continuity, or I call platform continuity. So you can write the same code, but on iOS, it would absolutely look the way it's supposed to look on iOS without making any changes at all, and similar for Android. I'll show you how to customize some Ionic app just quickly. And at this moment, I'll say, may the demo gods be with us. So absolutely. So if you have a terminal window here, the command just to install Ionic, like I said, is you just do a npm install or sudo npm install Ionic, and you want to install that globally. So I'm not going to run this because I already have Ionic installed. So if you run that, that should go and get you the latest version of Ionic right there on your computer. What I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to kind of cd into my desktop and then create, I'll start a new app. So the first app I'm going to start is the Ionic tabs application. So Ionic start, maybe just say my app, and you just specify what kind of template you wanted to use. So I'll just say the tabs because I really like the tabs. And this goes online, does a lot of things, goes to the Ionic repo, gets you everything you need with already some great boilerplate code, and just downloads a tabs application for you. So you don't have to, there's so much it gets for you. And we're just going to kind of wait for that to finish. It's just initialize it, and here we go. And that's done. So the next step is we created that on my desktop. So I'm just going to open up WebStorm. What you can do is you can just cd into your app, which is cd my app like that. Make sure you're in the project. But I'm just going to open up WebStorm. That the reason why I'm doing that, I will explain in a second. So I'm just going to look for my app, which is this. One great feature I like to use WebStorm is that the terminal here has already CD'd into the path of my app. So, and it gives me a terminal window. But if you're on a terminal window, you should just CD into my app. So for you to actually have your app running, it's really, really simple. All you just need to do is just Ionic serve, that one command, and then you should just go ahead and serve your application on the browser. Now, if you have Chrome installed, you can just use the Chrome emulator, and then you can select how it looks on Google Nexus, which is an Android emulator, and you can see the tab application. But one thing I want you to closely watch is that if I change this to an iOS simulator, you can see that the tabs now are on the bottom, because this is the platform continuity I was trying to explain to you, which is that I haven't written any code. I've just started this application and I'm already able to test it, use Chrome to test it. But as soon as I go on an iOS or a device, it changes, and you can see even the toggle button changes. And a great way to visualize this is by using what I call the Ionic Labs serve, and then you can just quit this. Again, we're in our project, so if you seed it into your project, you can just do Ionic serve /lab, and then if you enter that command, it actually comes up in your browser. So you can see two instances of your app, one for iOS and one for Android, and you can see how they look different. So this is, by the way, it's the same code. You can see how the toggle button looks different on Android and it looks different on iOS. So this is really great feature in platform continuity. And if you look at the transitions on Android, it kind of goes in there, while on iOS it kind of just slowly slides in. This is another great feature. You get this all for free. And we can actually go a step further and just, I have Ionic Labs, Ionic Lab, the Ionic Lab program I talked about, to actually see this app. So you can just go and say open existing application, and you can create an application. So we'll look at our desktop. We can just open the same application. Let's just make sure we quit this. And where are we? So we have my app here, and this is like, if you don't want to use the command line, it already has iOS installed for me. You can serve the application right here and see it, iOS and Android. You can build it. You can actually even just run the app, because I have iOS installed, and you can see your application is launching for iOS. You can go ahead and do that. And that's pretty much it. We'll just wait on that for a bit. We'll probably move on. You can see my iOS simulator is already fired up. Well, because I have all the SDKs installed, Xcode and stuff, it will work for me. For it to work for you, so you can see it all fired up. So that's a great feature. At this point, we'll probably go back to the slides. And absolutely. So just as I promised, I said I wasn't going to spend too much time. We're running out of time, and I know I need to save some time for questions. But this is exactly what I was trying to show you. We haven't installed anything apart from the Ionic CLI. We're already up and running. And if you don't want to install the Ionic CLI, you can use the Ionic Labs, the lab program, and that would actually take care of it for you. And for testing, it's just an Angular application. You just need to do a Karma or unit test, Karma unit test, or use Protractor. So you're good to go with that as well. So there's something called the Ionic Showcase, where you have great applications, because a lot of people want to know who's using Ionic. You've got companies like Mallzee, $1 million backed startup in Scotland. You got Sworkit, probably the top healthcare application for circuit training on the iOS and Android market, with around 5 million users. So, and Chef Steps, Just Watch is one of my favorite ones. So a lot of people say hybrid apps are for, like, just for you to get going and later on you leave. But you can see a lot of companies are using hybrid apps as a core of their business, and they're not necessarily looking to change that. So it's a new age and era. And also Angular 2 and Ionic version 2 is coming out. So Mike Harlington is going to have a talk about this. So this is something you should watch out for. These two are going to play nicely. I like the robots, by the way. If you want to get started with Ionic, you can just go to the Ionic Get Started, the documentation. The forum is very active. You can contribute on GitHub. You can also join the Slack community. Make sure to tweet me about that. We can send you an invite. It's really great. More than 2,000 people ready to answer your question any day, anytime. If you want to learn more Ionic, I would advise you to watch out for my book, Ionic by Example, scheduled for a launch by Christmas. And because of this Great Angular Remote Conference, my friend and I at Codecraft, we decided to give 70% off Ionic and Angular courses. So you can either go for the bundle if you use this coupon code, or just click this link. So it's 70% off just for the period of this conference. Another great book is by Jeremy Wilkin, which is Ionic in Action. He has a new version coming out in a couple of months, so watch out for that. So Brandy and Ben of Ionic have created this great app camp, which is a website where you can go and learn about hybrid mobile apps and Ionic. So be sure to visit that. You can also find me online. I'm pretty much everywhere. Same username at Sani Yusuf, GitHub, LinkedIn. I write about Ionic on Medium. Also, you can get me at Ionic UK. If you ever Google anyone anywhere and you find this username and it's not me, be sure to let me know. I'll be suing. Some really great contributors you want to follow. Make sure you follow Ionic's very own robot. He's great. Holly Shinsky of PhoneGap. Raymond Camden is a really great guy that tweets a lot of great stuff about hybrid apps and Ionic. Joshua Maroney, a very nice guy from Australia. Andrew and then Nick. So these are some of the guys maybe you might want to follow on Twitter to kind of be up to date with Ionic. At this point, I would wrap up my talk and I'll welcome any questions, and I hope you found it very useful. So over to you, Charles.
Sorry, it takes me a minute to find that mute button.
It's okay.
All right, looks like the same crazy person's asked all 5 questions that are in the Q&A at this point. So we'll go ahead and ask these questions. The first one is, can you use features like AirPlay on iPhone from Ionic?
Actually, I'm not really an iOS person like AirPlay. I'm not sure about that. So at this moment, I would say I don't really know. I don't know. I'm not really a Mac OS X person. So
okay.
I would say I don't know. You have to get back to me on Twitter about that one.
All right. Next question. Are the app views in your slides actually running Ionic apps on your computer?
Oh, okay. Well, kind of, not really Ionic apps. They're more just, they're using the Ionics, I would say yes, because they're using the Ionic slide, CSS and the Ionic bundle. So
okay.
Kind of, they are running Ionic instances, but it's just web. So
right.
Absolutely.
So you just embedded them in the slides?
Yes, more or less in a very minimal way.
That's really cool.
Yeah, actually, just to say something, those slides are actually a fork of there's a slide called Ionic Present, so you can fork that if you need to present anything by Ionic, and they're already built in.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Which versions of Android and iOS are currently supported by Ionic?
So technically, and this is a good question, technically all versions are supported. But Ionic, they tend to ask you to mostly support 4.1 Android upwards.
Mm-hmm.
And iOS, maybe iOS, I think it's iOS 6 or 7 upwards. But with Crosswalk, you can pretty much now have it work anywhere. So these are just good practices, but they don't necessarily mean, oh, Ionic doesn't support a specific. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. How long after a new mobile operating system is updated can we use Ionic on it?
I would say as soon as, because it's not necessarily dependent on the native side of things. What you need to understand is Ionic is just web. It's just Angular
mm-hmm.
code. So it always looked the same, except if maybe there's a new bug or feature. Like recently with iOS 9, there was a bug with the location. iApp Safari are going to fix it pretty soon. But apart from that, not generally, if there's any new feature like new transitions, they tend to just do it quickly, but it's not dependent. So as soon as, that's the right answer to that question, if you ask me.
All right. Any news or info about Windows Phone support for Ionic? And is there a way to use Ionic to target tablet and desktop web app?
Well, yes, you can use Ionic on Windows Phone. I know Max, the founder of Ionic, is really working hard on this to make all the quirks of the Windows Phone browser engine, make sure it works. So you can, but at the moment, maybe I would say you hold up a little bit, or you might have to do a little bit of one or two things yourself. And also, is there a way to use Ionic target desktop web apps? Yes, actually, the Ionic Labs app is built with some Ionic styles. So you can see some of these things are Ionic styles. They use, I can't really remember the name of the technology, but yes, if you have a hybrid kind of desktop app that uses a web view or in any way, you can use Ionic slides in essence.
All right. I know that native iOS apps require a Mac. Does Ionic require a Mac for iOS development?
That's kind of a tricky question, because I would say if you want to develop an Ionic app, if you don't have a Mac, you can do that. Yes, you can just use the server. When you need to test Mac features, you still need an iPhone of sorts. So you can go from building to submission to the App Store without owning a Mac. Absolutely. They're not really dependent on each other. That's more of a Cordova thing. If you want to like run on your computer, then maybe you need a Mac if you want to develop using like the simulator or use the iOS SDK. But you can get around that with PhoneGap build and things like that allow you to just upload your assets and then build. I hope that makes sense.
Right. So you don't need a Mac to...
Yes, you don't necessarily need a Mac
to build the app. You just...
For iOS, absolutely. You can do that with PhoneGap build.
Very cool. All right. Last question. Can you provide a prod app using Crosswalk with Ionic?
Absolutely. I can provide a lot of them. You can. I built a couple of that. I built 4. You can check out Perkbox on the iOS store, an app for how to buy. You can check out. I think Just Watch, the new Just Watch application from the guys in Germany. I think it uses Crosswalk. But me personally, if you check out any app developed by Huddlebuy, so Perkbox is probably the one I would say you check out. It's built with Crosswalk and it's in production.
All right, very cool. Well, thanks, Sani. It was really interesting. Every time I hear a talk on Ionic, I'm always like, okay, now I'm going to go fiddle with this for the next week.
You should definitely, Charles. Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, like I said, I'm always on Twitter, so thank you.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and take a break. And Jeremy is up next in about 5 minutes, so hang tight, or if you need a 5-minute break, go take one, and we'll be back then.
Okay, thank you.